hearty warm welcome to you, my beautiful Africans from all corners of the world. My greeting today, is carried by divine love, for God is love. And I'm inspired by these words, or rather by this verse. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Let's continue with part 2 of the invitation to self-discover with Reverend Jeanette Sibanda, leaning into your story. Reverend, welcome to KisimaRadio once again, and please greet our listeners.
Thank you so much. Greetings to all our listeners out there.
Amen. All right. I was just, listening as if you're going to come up with something else, something, you always have something inspiring to say. Anyway. Right. In our previous podcast, one of the things you mentioned that got stuck with me is that self-discovery is a process of becoming conscious of who you are and your environment or your surroundings. And, Reverend, the entire week, I was like, sure, then this must be the longest journey ever. This must be the longest journey ever. Anyway, so today we continuing with where we left off last week.
Yes.
So let me hand it over to you.
I think last week you did ask a question, and we did say that we were going to look at it this week, and maybe we can start with that if that's okay.
Yes.
So you asked the question, what do I mean, or what are we talking about when I talk about exposure, that we need to expose ourselves?
Absolutely.
So I thought
I'm impressed you even remember that question, because I noted it. I was going to ask you.
You were going to ask me. So I
Yes.
figured let's start there, and
Awesome.
then we can maybe, build from that,
All right.
that conversation. So by exposure, or maybe exposing ourselves, I didn't, it sounds very scary and sounds weird to use that term, but basically the meaning was take a risk of being open, take a risk of being vulnerable with people and being real. And I mean, we live in a world where, every time people tell you, you hear this all the time, first impressions matter,
Sure.
right? And it's true. And so as a result, what we do is we then try to present the best version of ourselves so that we can be accepted and so that people would love us first time they meet us. It's like, we connected and whatnot, and it's on the basis of that best version of ourselves we did. And so what my thoughts were, so imagine that you meet somebody and then they like you and they think they know you.
Yes.
And then only to discover, a few months down the line, or, a year later or whatever, that, I didn't know that about you.
Yes.
Right? And then there is that, can I trust you? Can I?
Yes.
Oh, are you real? Like, so there's lots of questions that arises from that. So I'm not saying that people should not put the best version of themselves first to sort of come across and build relationships, but just taking a risk of saying, what if I presented the real me? Right.
The risk of being rejected, the risk of being
the risk
judged.
Of being liked or not liked.
Liked.
What? Yes. Who am I? Like, what if I presented me?
Yes.
And,
Sure.
can they love me for me? Can they accept me for me? Can they? And if they reject me, they rejected you. If they love you, they loved you and not somebody else.
Wow.
It's a risk. It's difficult. And obviously, that's not something you're going to do in all spaces, because it depends on what space it is and for what purpose are you there. But for building relationships, I think, for wanting to connect deeply with people, if you have interest in developing a relationship that goes from meeting today in a boardroom and then never seeing each other again, to I want you to be my sister.
But
I
what
want
does it?
to be
okay.
friends. Yeah.
But what does it take for one to overcome that fear of, being rejected, that fear of, will they welcome me into their space? Will they accept me for who I am if I tell them the truth, or if I give them the true Nosipo?
The truth is, I don't know if there is a way of overcoming it forever and be like, oh, I'm done with this. I don't know, because I think the longing, the desire within us keeps on coming up and bubbling up, the desire to really be loved and to be accepted. So there'll always be that. And I think this is why the taking a risk is a constant thing, to say right. I'm constantly taking a risk and being aware of the fact that I'm taking a risk of connecting with most people. I'm taking a risk of a long-term relationship. And not to be like discovering. I mean, obviously there's so much depthness to a person, which you're not going to figure out in one day, in one moment. But instead of presenting a facade of who you might be, why not present the real you? The shy you, if you're shy. The nervous you, if you're a nervous person. And not pretend to have it all together. I guess maybe that's what I'm trying to say, to just present like, oh, I have it all figured out. I don't. I don't have it all figured out. I am, I'm figuring it out as I walk. I am becoming aware of my surrounding and the people around me. And whatever it is that's going on within me, can I be true and genuine about it? So knowing that you're taking a risk will always bring about the fear. And it's courage that is then required in order to do that, to overcome the fear. And it's going to be courage that's called out of you on a constant basis. How courageous are you to go deeper into relationships with people around you and not try to be superficial? So that's basically it,
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. Well, I'm glad it's fair enough. But I mean, yes, it's just taking a risk. And I think one thing that I wanted to mention also on this is the idea that by doing self-discovery and wanting to have deep connectedness and with relationships, people might be thinking, okay, are you saying that we must have like all deep relationships with everybody we meet?
Sure.
It might just break you apart. You won't be able to have like deep relationships with everybody you meet and every location you go to. But what I'm talking about is basically when you're feeling secured and confident in who you are, the relationships that you build, they are not built on the facade and the best version of you and not the other version of you that nobody knows about. So that when we seek relationships out of genuine interest, because we are safe and secure in those relationships, then we are not competing, we are not comparing ourselves, we are not trying to outsmart one another, but we rather be like sisters and journey along and find ourselves in good relationships with people that we are in relationship with. Yes, you will not be able to do deep relationships with everybody you come across with, but the people that are close to you, the people that are getting to meet you for the first time, they don't meet somebody that you're not, and then the next week when they meet you in a different location, you're something else. But they meet the same person everywhere they go. They're like, we know you. We may not have a relationship with you, but we know you. Like, you are consistent in who you present yourself to be in every space that you find yourself.
Consistency is key. I'm also listening and I'm thinking, wow. So the minute I discover who I am, consistency becomes, it comes naturally to be Unosipo, the same Nosipo wherever I am.
Yes. And it also becomes you become secure. So sometimes we talk about people who have like a lot of insecurities, right? Like they feel insecure, they feel threatened, they feel this, all of these things are coming because we are not confident or anchored in who we are. So whenever somebody comes along that seems to trigger some things in us, and then we immediately feel insecure.
Sure.
And so that triggers us to respond in different ways, and we start behaving in different ways because we're feeling insecure. And relationships are broken because we're feeling insecure. So having the security that comes from knowing who you are, coming from the deep shalom that we talked about, where you aren't trying to please and dance around for people to love you or not love you or feeling insecure, but you're rather feeling yourself grounded. And so you become the same and in all spaces. So you become that consistent person because you aren't trying to please or, feeling insecure, trying to make people love you. They only love not who you really are, but they love an idea of you.
Yes, what I'm giving them.
Yes, what you're giving them, that's what they're going to embrace or reject. But if you gave them, who you are, then that becomes consistent enough.
All right, so steps or the process to self-discover.
Yes. Well,
Not necessarily steps, but I mean, let's
yes, the
talk about
process.
the process.
The process towards it, yeah. So this, for me, in the way that was helpful for me to do this, and I actually even wanted to maybe even walk through this and look at it even from, one of the biblical stories. But the first thing is, not the first thing, but one of the things to do, which is what I find it to be key, is being able to look back. So starting with looking back at your childhood and assessing your relationship. When you look back at your relationships in your childhood, and you can be using photos, right? So this is another thing that you can do. You can take photos of your family, photos that you have of when you're younger, and looking at them and like connecting with that person in that picture, and looking at her and or him and be like, what was going on with this person? What were the relationships around this person? And, around your family, around friends, and around neighbors. And so as you look at these pictures, what emotions are being, are coming up, are bubbling up as you look at these pictures? And so actually journaling this process of saying, we're looking at this picture, and then, you either felt excitement, you smiled, or maybe even a teardrop. Yeah. Because different emotions are bubbling up, are coming up as you're looking at this, as you're looking back. And then so you pay attention to those emotions, because those emotions are telling you a story. Those emotions are telling you that there's either joy, there was love, there was sadness, there was brokenness, there was woundedness, all of those things so you come up and then so you just write that. And I do recognize that sometimes when we do this, there is the issue of memories. Some of the memories, our brains, they file them so far back because they were so traumatic that we can't remember. And when you try to remember them, your brain thinks that's too much for you to remember. So the way to protect you is to not remember those. And so then you realize that needs professional help. That's not something you can just journal away.
Yes, yes.
So to be able to recognize as well that there are things that actually I need help with, or maybe there are just, things that I do remember easily, and then those things that I can journal about and then I can write about, and I can pay attention to what bubbles up. And when I recognize what's bubbling up, all the emotions that are coming up, so what do those emotions mean then? The next step that you do, what do these emotions mean? Do these emotions mean that I was a very happy child, had good relationships with the people around me? Or maybe you start to recognize that there were people who hurt you.
Yes.
You start to recognize that there are people who wounded you, people who disappointed you, and people who, abused you if there is abuse in the story. And then you start to recognize there were people who protected you. There are people who helped you. There are people who embraced you. There are people who loved you. And the more you come to realize these things, then you come to a place of even deeper connections with those people. So it moves away from just being about me, but also being about the other people around me that I've related to. And some people, you'll realize like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe how much hurt lies in this story, how much brokenness lies in this story. And then the next thing would be asking yourself then, how did I deal with that?
Yeah.
What did I do? What response did I have towards that particular event or relationship? How did I handle it? Because in that conversation, as you discover how you dealt with it, you most likely made vows with yourself, an agreement with yourself. So you will hear, then there will be things like, I will never, ...
Yeah.
Or I will forever, ... So those are agreements and vows that you make. And some of these vows and agreements we make, they're really detrimental to us and to the relationships around us, right? So to give an example, it might be, I will never trust men.
Yes.
I will never trust my neighbor, like never trust a neighbor, never trust nannies. So all the nannies are now, brushed with the same brush because of an experience that you might have, or all the men are, so all of that. So you come to terms with some of the vows you've made, some of the vows that I made in the different events that I came to recognize was I didn't need anybody. I will be okay on my own.
Yeah.
Like, I knew that I had to learn to fight for myself. And not because there weren't people around, but because the events that have happened in my life made me say, you are on your own and you need to learn to depend on yourself. So I will rather do the stuff than ask for help, because when I went for help, I didn't get any. So asking for help is out of the question. So you make an agreement with yourself, you make a vow with yourself that, you know what, I'm good. Thank you very much, I'm good. So I'm going to be independent, and I'm going to do everything to know how to do everything so that I can be independent, because there will be no one out there to help me when I need help. Right? So you make those. So the way you come to discover these things, you come to realize, the reason why I have difficulty with asking for help is when I needed help.
Yes.
I didn't get any. When I asked for help, I was rejected.
So already in my mind, before I even ask someone for help, I already have an answer that, they're going to say no, or they're going to, just ignore me. But I've got a negative already response, perceived response.
Or you're not even going to do it. And you don't even recognize why, because mostly you just go out ahead and do stuff. And someone's like, but why didn't you ask for help? You're like, what do you mean? Why didn't I ask for help? I could do it more.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
So, but it's an agreement you've made with yourself way, way back. An event happened and you make an agreement. So you make a vow. I will do this. I will. And so those decisions begin to make sense because you have looked back at some of the events that have happened and how you dealt with it and what agreements you've made looking at that, right? And then at the same time, you recognize there were people who came alongside of you, who helped you, who protected you, who loved you, that you are where you are not on your own. There were people alongside of you who made it possible for you to be where you are, who came alongside of you. And sometimes when we see and we live in the broken stories, we don't even get to recognize that had it not been for this person, that brokenness would have eaten me away. Had it not been for that person, that brokenness would have, erased my life. I would have taken a different trajectory of life, right? But because of this particular person, maybe a neighbor, maybe a sibling, maybe a parent, or maybe a school teacher for that matter, spoke words of life in the middle of your death.
Sure.
And then it changed your trajectory of life. So even if you still have a lot of other woundedness within you, their words of life saved you because they made you be determined to overcome every obstacle for you to be successful. So then you begin to recognize it in those people in your life that have had, a great impact in making you become. And this is what when we were talking about becoming human last week.
Yes.
These are the things that make us human, right?
Sure.
We talk about Ubuntu, even though the term has just been so overused and, and like abused. But that's exactly what makes us human. It's because of the other people around us and the interactions that we have with them. So those are the things for me that say that's what you do. So that's the first thing that you do. It's just going back and looking at that and making assessments and journaling. And not everything is going to come back in one go.
Yeah.
And not everything, and it's not a process you can do in one day and be like, I did it and then I'm done and I'm over it. No, it's something that you learn to sit with on a daily basis.
And then I guess another challenge that one will experience in this process is, who do I then speak to? Who can I approach and just sit down and say, hey, this is what I've just discovered about myself, and it makes me feel this way. I'm scared, I'm ashamed, I'm this, I'm that. It's hurting, whatever feelings that or emotions that I'm experiencing at the time. So how do I pick that person? How do I know where to go to, who to approach?
This is it's a tough one, to be honest with you, because not everybody is a safe space. And so we need to learn to discover safe spaces. But even most importantly, for us to be safe spaces. Because when we are safe spaces, we discover other safe spaces. So if I become a safe space for you, I find a safe space in you. Does it make sense? So it's like, by looking for safe spaces, why not become a safe space And then people, when they recognize that I'm a safe space, and come to me, and then I can find safe spaces in them as well. But usually, like, you're looking for somebody who's mature, somebody who really has an understanding. And I mean, there are people who are trained to be lay counselors. There are people who are trained to be pastors, who are trained to do pastoral counseling, and there are people who are professional counselors. And I'm hoping and praying that there would be spaces out there that people can find. But also my dream is to create those safe spaces.
Oh, wow. Okay.
My dream is to create places where people can come and say, we are going to be a safe space for one another. We're going to walk the journey together.
Sure.
We're going to, I use the term that we get wounded in community. We get wounded because we interact with other people. If we lived alone, we would not get wounded.
Okay.
You will get physically hurt if you fall, but that's about it. You're not going to get your heart broken when you live alone, right? Your heart gets broken because you interacted with somebody. And so if the healing as well would come from that place where somebody embraces you and helps you walk that journey. So healing in community becomes essential. So developing those communities, finding those communities where women are saying, communities and churches are saying that we want to be safe spaces.
You talk about developing those communities, where people can find a safe space. But how does one do that? How does one begin to become a safe space for the next person and then develop a community of a safe space?
I think the one thing to do is really, if you say, I want to do this, it's worth asking in the community around you, who else wants to do this?
Okay.
All right. I think it's worth a ask. I want to journey, and I do recognize that this process is going to demand this much from me.
Sure.
Who else is willing to do this?
Okay.
And let's do it together as a group, and let's do it together as a community. And then we can find resources. I mean, there are resources out there that are available for people to do this and ask questions, the right questions, and Bible studies, actually, that are available to help people dig into their own stories as well.
All right.
So, so the one thing that I do want to mention as well, because I do recognize that we will run out of time, is that you do one by looking back in your own life, in your own family, in your close circle. And the second thing is actually to find your social location.
Okay.
Looking at your social location. So when you grow up in certain communities, we know that those communities, they are experiencing certain things. It's almost like that community is typical to get something like this. And then those events as well shape us. The story of our community shapes us. It influences us as much as our own small family experiences.
So true.
So it's the next level. So after you do the work of doing, personal journey into your own story, then the next thing is doing a journey of your community, learning about your community, knowing the story of your community and what shapes this community. Because we know that in some of the communities, violence is high. So you can imagine how your mental well-being is like if you live in a community where you always have to look behind, who's watching you, when you have to be on your tiptoes. So, and then people live in a state of trauma. People live in a state of crisis. People live in a state of survival.
Sure.
So we can't ignore the story of the community. We can't ignore the story of your social location, because that also has a great impact in your well-being and how rooted you are. So being able to do that also takes another level of work. And that work then will also demand certain responses from you, and how you've dealt with the stories of your community, how they've shaped you, and how they're shaping you now, and what are you going to do, or how are you responding to them as well. When you discover all these things, then you start to discover how this thing is so intertwined and complex, and it's not as simple as straightforward, and that's why it becomes a journey that it becomes a beautiful thing of discovery if we're doing it as a community rather than doing it as an individual alone. Because when you get to see some things that are negative, that are good, or things that are building us, or things that are breaking us, and then the question then becomes, as a community, what are we going to do about this? What do we then do? Are we going to live in the stage, or are we going to live towards healing? So that's basically those two levels of looking into and exploring. And then we will also discover in that process that there were some longings, some desires that were not met.
Yes.
We discover dreams that are shut up inside of us. And you're like, whoa, like I had these dreams. And then asking the questions, what changed your dream? What changed your trajectory? What silenced that dream? What silenced the longing? And then as you discover it, then you discover, oh my goodness, like I still want to do that. I still have that longing. I still have that desire. I still have that dream. And then you start to even discover your passions, right? And sometimes we find ourselves in places where we don't live our passions. We live, but unpassionately at all, without any passion.
Sure.
And we discover that passion was killed a long time ago. A desire, a dream was killed a long time ago. And so when we do that work and we look back into those stories, those events, those dreams, and you discover so much of who you are. I remember that there's a picture of mine that comes when I was a teenager before I experienced rape. And I remember how bubbly of a young girl I was. Like I was such a joyous girl, like I was bouncy.
Sure.
And then that person disappeared along the path. I was like, what happened to that girl?
Sure.
Like, where is she? And what would you say to her today? What is it that she needs to hear? And talk to her about that and have the conversation. And so doing that through journaling also helps, because then you get to speak to that little girl who was silenced, to speak to that dream that got silenced, you speak to that longing, the desire that God had put in you that would have sparked a lot of passion for your life, and yet it's not there. And then you can rediscover all of that as you do that.
I'm sitting here and I'm thinking perhaps one person listening would be or might be asking, but why do I have to take myself through this unnecessary pain? Why do I have to go back and relieve all this trauma, all this pain?
Yeah. You know what? I felt the same way too. When before I began this journey, I always thought, I've moved on. I don't need this. Like, I've moved on.
Sure.
Like, why do I need to take myself through that pain again? It's like, it's unnecessary, Especially when I had to do counseling, I was like, what? I don't need that. I'm a dust yourself up and get going. Yeah. That's the kind of attitude I had.
Sure.
Until I unraveled, because that pain has a way of coming back. When you have not dealt with it, it has a way of coming back. It comes back in different forms. It comes back as contempt. It comes back as hatred. It comes back as anger. It comes back as self-destruction. It comes back as caring. The inability to have empathy towards other people's pain, because we become numb. So when you numb your pain, because the moving on is numbing pain. When you numb one emotion or one feeling, you numb all others.
Yeah.
So you can't numb pain and think you can experience deep joy or deep love or deep desire, So it's like, instead of, so that's the attitude that we have. Like, no, I'm just going to move on. I don't want to have to, why should I go take myself through that pain?
Sure.
But it will come back, because the inability to have empathy, the inability to deeply love without fear, without conditions, to deeply love when you're being rejected. Those are not possible, because you have numbed your heart.
Yes.
You've filled your heart with walls of steel, and no one can get in there. And so it's almost like somebody gave an example of a shrapnel. I don't know whether we would know. A shrapnel, like, a piece of metal, like back in the day when bombs would explode in the World War.
Sure.
And then you just get like a piece of metal that gets stuck in your body, right? And so it's not removed, it's there, but we can move on. But every time somebody gets closer to that you start to pull back because like you're going to touch my pain, right? But no, don't touch me. And so that's what separates, like that's what inhibits us from having these deep relationships, because you are afraid of somebody touching your wound. So you keep moving back, like, ouch, ouch. Because when people get closer to your heart, they touch your pain. So you'd rather keep people at arm's length, keep even the closest people that love you at arm's length, because if they get close to you, they will touch that pain, and nobody wants that. So dealing with it and going back actually allows you to actually face it and get to the place of grieving. Grieving is a very important part of this process, because it's when you sit down and look at those pictures and you feel the sadness and you feel the pain and you feel the brokenness. Grieve. Mourn the loss you experienced of disappointment. Mourn the loss of good relationships that were, distorted because of whatever happened, events that happened, the sin that took place. Mourn the distance you experienced when you wanted to be loved, when you wanted to be helped, when you wanted to be embraced and people didn't see you. Cry.
Yeah.
Grieve. Let it, allow the pain to sit with your heart and cry.
Sure.
Sit with it. Sit with the discomfort. Cry and mourn it. Grieve it. And to the point where you're like, I think I've mourned, and hear that. And face it again and look at it until you know it has no power over you. Until you can see that this is a scar and it's no longer a wound that's bleeding or that's festering away. So instead of shying away from it, so grieving is a key important thing. And visiting it and writing down and speaking about it and see. So you grieve, you speak it, you tell your story, you cough it out.
Yeah.
This is my pain. This is my pain. Cough it out of your body. Cough it out of your system by speaking it. So this is why it's very important that if you have a community or if you have somebody that you talk to, that they can mirror you. They can stand there and they can mirror you. They can receive all of that.
Sure.
And receive it and then embrace you. Give you love instead of that pain that you experienced back then. Give you acceptance instead of the rejection you experienced back then. And that's the healing process, right? Because this person is like, I was rejected and it hurt so much. Oh, it hurt so much. So like, yes, it did hurt.
Sure.
And here I am to love you.
Yes.
Here I am to receive you. Here I am to embrace you. So instead of that pain that you experienced, now you're experiencing love and grace. And so what you will be surprised by doing that, there's a huge relief that comes. It's like, wow, like I didn't know it would feel this good to tell somebody about my pain.
Yeah.
I didn't know. And then to be received and not be rejected. It's
Sure.
like, it's healing. So telling our stories heals. Telling our stories restores us. Telling our stories brings so much hope in us, that there is hope. Humanity is not the brokenness we've experienced. Humanity is life that we're experiencing right now. So to get to that, it's key.
Sure. Leaning into your story, that was Reverend Jeanette Sibanda. Carl Gustav Jung writes, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." Today I challenge you to dare the fear of discovering who you really are and begin to live life in abundance. For Jesus says in the book of John, chapter 10, verse 10, "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it in all its fullness." Until we reconnect again next week, may you all enjoy life in its fullness in Christ Jesus. Remain a blessing.